Hello, everyone. Pastor Winston here. Hey, episode 21. What about the bush? So, we're going to dive into that today and see what the Lord has for us in it, what we can get out of it. And the first thing is, what about the bush? And this is Exodus 3 2 through 6. And I'm going to read that to you. And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire, brought out of the midst of a bush. He looked, and behold, the bush was burning, yet it was not consumed. And Moses said, I will turn aside to see this great sight, why the bush is not burned. And when the Lord saw that he turned aside to see, God called to him out of the bush, Moses, Moses. And he said to him, Here I am. And then he said, Do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. You know, the lowly bush is really a symbol, in a sense, of God's fiery presence in him. We talked about that last time. It's a manifestation of divine energy living in the branches of a lowly, insignificant, little, thorny bush, yet aflame with fire, and yet preserved through its burning. And there's a great and blessed truth in all of this. And this is a truth that Jesus exposes to the Sadducees, as we're going to see on our next slide, which comes from Matthew 22, 23 to 33. And so the Sadducees ask about the resurrection. Now, they don't believe in the resurrection. So the day came, the Sadducees came to him and they say, there's no resurrection. And so they ask him a question, saying, Teacher, Moses said, he said all this stuff, and I got to brighten up my screen a little bit and see a little bit better. There we go. If a man dies having no children, his brother must marry the widow and raise up offspring for his brother. Now there were 7 brothers among us. First married and died, and having no offspring left his wife to his brother. So too the second and third, down through the 7th. After them all the women died. After them all the woman died. And in the resurrection, therefore, of the 7, whose wife will she be? For they all had her. Well, there's a name for this kind of activity, and I found it in my good friend Alexander McLaren, who lived a couple hundred years ago. Anyway, the Sadducees were cavilling, and this is the definition: to argue about nonsense or trivial matters. So isn't that interesting? It's right there. And we're going to see that Jesus really puts them to shame. He draws from the foundational scriptures of the Sadducees in 2 ways: his intelligence and God's self-centered revelation of who he is. And so we'll move on from there. So here we have Jesus' answer to them. He says, you're wrong. Because you know neither the scriptures nor the power of God. For in the resurrection, they neither marry nor are given in marriage, but are like angels in heaven. And as for the resurrection of the dead, have you not read what was said to you by God? I am the God of Abraham, and the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. I am is this present sense. It's in the present tense, actually. And Jesus sees that the resurrection is in the very name of God. Something you can read this chapter 100 times and not really focus on the most important thing, which I am is the name of God, and that it's present. It's the living God, the God that's present and among us. So Jesus uses the fundamental scriptures of the Sadducees to extol God's self-revelation at the burning bush, to teach the hope of the resurrection. Alexander McLaren goes on to say this about it. He says, "Did not Moses teach you that the dead rise when he said, 'I am at this time the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob'?" I added the "I am." But at this time, I am at this time the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. This is the hope of the resurrection. This is really, really good news. So Jesus speaks not out of a past relationship. He doesn't say, "I was the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob," but of the present relationship that God enjoys in the midst of his people. As if to say, if the God of Abraham loses Abraham at death, what does that say about God? Is death stronger than God? Does not God's self-revelation as God of Abraham lead logically to faith in Abraham's resurrection? That's absolutely. Jesus says, "I am the resurrection and the life. And whoever lives and believes in me shall never die." This is strong stuff. Good, strong stuff. Our next slide carries that thought a little bit further. Let's see, 1:6, yeah. Okay, so Jesus' self-centeredness extends the reality of the resurrection even further when he points out, and this is verse 32b, he says, "He is not God of the dead, but of the living." So he's bringing more force to bear on this, on who God is. And when the crowd heard it, they were astonished at his teaching. So this is not God. This Greek is at the beginning for emphasis. God is not the God of Abraham's dead body. No. Abraham is living because he's part of the living God's name. And that's good news for us. It says, for all who believe have right to be called the children of God. And because Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are still living, then all those who have died in his name are still living. Because Jesus still is, not was, even though he was, but it's not a past tense because he still is their God. Wow. So Jesus goes on here. He uses the eternal relationship existing between the fathers and God to show that the nature of this communion is unaffected by death. For to say that God is their God, then death reduces the fathers and all others to nothingness. To say that God was their God, then death reduces the fathers and all others to nothingness. Therefore, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are still living and have or will have a body. And the same goes for all those who've died in his name. They are still living because God still is, not was, their God. So McLaren talks this about, he says, the relation between them is eternal and guarantees their immortal life. But immortality without corporeity, the quality or state of having a body, is not conceivable as the perfect state. And if the dead still live, there must come a time when the whole man shall partake in redemption. And in body, soul, and spirit, the glorified and risen saint shall be forever with the Lord. This is sound Christian orthodoxy here. But Tertullian, an early church father, knew the objection that people would have to this. And he says, but how, you say, can a substance which has been dissolved be made to appear again? He says, consider thyself a man, and you will believe in it. Reflect on what you were before you came into existence. Nothing. Nothing. This truth is revealed as we see in the bush that burns, but it's not consumed. In the same way, the church and the individuals in whom the Spirit of God dwells partakes in the immortality of the indwelling God, the Holy Spirit, and will one day experience the resurrection of the body, the soul, and the spirit. So we're going to sort of close with this. What about that little ragged, sapless thorn bush springing up and living a solitary life amidst the sands of the desert? Can you kind of relate to that a little bit? It was not too humble to hold God. It was not too gross to burst into flame when he came. And it was not too fragile to be gifted with the undying being that nestled in its branches. Truly, because God dwells in us, we live as long as he lives. And the fire that he puts in our heart shall be a fountain of fire springing up into life everlasting. So now, I want to say goodbye for episode 21. And I hope to see you in church on Sunday. And have a good rest of the week. And think on these things. Think on I am, the presence of God, and how incredible that is for you. God bless you, and just really have a great week.